So, welcome back again, and now for the third lesson of the Practical Ethics course for all students of the Frankfurt School, here of the Bachelor program, but actually the material is basically the same if on separate and higher or lower levels. This part is the part in which Susanna Hahn, who is a co-author of the script, is the specialist. And it's the core part of ethical argument, reflection and discussion. This is a little structure in a very non-structured field. Whenever possible, Susanna Hahn will teach this herself. At least I hope so. Nevertheless, I provide here a little background and I'll do it in a rather stenographic and laconic manner. Again, let's see where we stand. We stand here, ethical method. Whether this is really a method or more a metaphor of how we go about practical problems may be left open here. I'll just give you an impression of what searching for a reflective equilibrium is all about. It's a going back and forth between the particular and the general, and it's guided by a search for a principled and more encompassing account of problem solutions and problems. The basic idea of reflective equilibrium search. It's the following thing. You are there and you have a problem. That is, you don't know what to do. If you do not know what to do, then you are in a way out of reflective equilibrium. You didn't find some coherent and general account of what the problem is and what its solution might be yet. So let's go into very simple examples first. What you want to do is you want to test ethical principles and theories of ethics in ways as closely parallel as possible to the ways of testing scientific principles and statements. Why is that so? Well, you are of the, I hope, of the opinion that modern science has been a success story. There is something like progress in modern science. Now, this is certainly also related to the culture of discussion in modern science. It is related to the discipline imposed on those people who articulate their views in the course of scientific discourse. Therefore, we should try to model our practical discourse in ways that are as closely similar as possible to what is going on in scientific discourse. And that's what at least John Rawls, the most important practical philosopher of the 20th century, is aiming at. So you should start from the basic premise that the progressive character of scientific discourse more crucially depends on the interplay between general and specific than on, say, the objectivity, on the fact that some facts out there determine what scientists think and so on. It's not observation per se in science that really guarantees its objectivity. It's actually somewhat doubtful what observation means. It's so theory laden. Just think about an electron. You don't see an electron. You see things on very complicated machines. And what you see there is only by theories related to an observation of the movements of an electron or something like this. You don't see the electron. It's not direct observation. And in that sense, it's not so clear why science is so much more progressive than practical discourse. Rather than going over complicated matters of epistemology and the philosophy of science, let's look at a very simple and basic example. You observe the killing of a person. You have an intuition. You don't like it. You regard this as intuitively wrong. And then you say, don't do it or something like this. If you want to justify your normative utterance, do not do this, then you need some general principle. It's like in science. If you want to predict that, say, stones will fall to the ground if not held up close to the surface of the earth with a certain acceleration, then, well, you need a general law. And here you need a general covering rule if you want to justify something. So you form the general principle, killing is wrong. Now, you are confident you have a good general reason for what you see. It's in general bad to kill another person. However, you are confronted with somebody attacking you. And you think intuitively, again, this is the intuition rather than the general principle, it must be permissible to defend yourself. You conclude that you have to modify your general principle one. And so you think maybe it's better to articulate the following principle and to live by this one. Killing is wrong except in cases of self-defense. Seems to be reasonable. And this is actually the structure that you also find in artificial intelligence research. You go for a general rule and then come the things unless so-and-so, unless so-and-so. So you have a general rule with certain exceptions, and that's what it's all about. And in the course of learning, you learn to make the exceptions. You also may learn that your general rule is applicable to realms you were not thinking of before, but that's another matter. Now, you are attacked with a raw egg, and you can defend yourself with a gun you happen to hold in your hand. Are you really entitled to use the gun if the guy with the egg jumps at you? You have an intuition that might not be the right thing, so you conclude that your principle 2 must again be modified. Your new principle 3 may be something like this. Killing is wrong except in cases of self-defense that require such a measure of defense as you use to prevent a very serious evil threatening the attacked individual. And if it's you, so you must find out whether it's excessive force that you will be using or not. And you go back and forth in your reflections until you have a rather sophisticated system of general principles and specific case solutions. This is absolutely analogous to what happens in law. In the Anglo-Saxon sphere, you go about it by first looking at cases, then generalizing, then looking again at cases, and so on. Legal argument is something that goes about precedents and general norms and then goes on. Vice versa, or in a way only vice versa, but also very analogous. Continental law starts from general principles typically, but then also has to go to specific decisions, which then in a process of going back and forth fix the content of the law. can we really articulate the general principles underlying the procedure itself? Here is a way to do so, a very stylized and very simple-minded one. You first form basic intuitions and then you try to select a general principle or ethical theory fitting these intuitions. You go in a systematic way about your mini acts and try to reach some sort of coherence to control your discretionary ways of going about them. And that's the rational part in the reflection process. You always have to derive the implied solutions S from T for some case C. That's the general thing. And once you have derived such a solution, you have to form a considered judgment of whether or not the solution is intuitively adequate. So go back to the case with killing is wrong. So you have a general theory, it's forbidden to kill, and then you have a case of somebody attacking yourself, and the derived solution is you may not kill the attacker, even though the attacker might go after you with an axe and you have a gun in your hand. So you may say this solution, as implied by the general principle, seems to be intuitively wrong. You better go for something else, and then you come up with this killing is wrong unless in cases of self-defense and so on. So if the solution S would have been adequate, then your theory is corroborated. If S is inadequate, then it's in a way refuted. You have to modify T. That's what you did when you went from killing is wrong to unless it's in cases of self-defense or unless it's in self-defense. Or you have to revise your intuition and say, well, I thought this is justified here, but I'm not sure anymore if I look at all the cases I have solved by this general principle before, and I perhaps, thinking twice, should actually revise my intuition and act otherwise. What you are searching for here is what we call an intrapersonal reflective equilibrium. The procedure will help you to find a coherent body of convictions, particular case solutions and so on, that will help you to organize your thoughts in the future and to defend and critically assess your actions. The interpersonal reflective equilibrium is a different matter. Now we are still, as I said, in your own breast, so to say, going for an intrapersonal one. You go back and forth between modifying general principles in the process of searching the reflective equilibrium. You go back and forth, and acceptance and rejection of specific judgments will drive the whole thing until you no more need to modify what you are doing. And that is temporarily a reflective equilibrium for yourself, an intrapersonal one. An interpersonal reflective equilibrium actually means that the specific and the general, like in a Roman arc, support each other. In a Roman arc, one stone holds the other one only because the stones are there, is the arc there. So one stone gotten out of the arc, then the whole arc breaks down. And this is the concept of coherence, of supporting things, each other, and so on. So you have to look for coherence and coherent judgment, and that's what the intrapersonal reflective equilibrium is all about. Whether what is coherent is really sound is an additional question. But you only have this coherence. That's something we have to admit. Most of the time it's only coherence and not something external tests like what we can do. The search for reflective equilibrium could incorporate and should incorporate some respect for established practices. You are not starting afresh, anew at any time. So you go to some country and there are established practices you find in a way strange. You still have to accept them. You go to Great Britain and you find this established practice of driving on the left side of the street. You find it absolutely weird. But you have a good reason, selfish and moral, to respect this in the first place. If separate individuals respect established practices, then this of course will also induce them to converge on something. So that's helpful. So many intrapersonal reflective equilibrium notions may be connected by shared practices. And that's why respect for established business practices in the first place is so important. What is right and wrong is a matter of reflection, that is true, but it's also a matter of accepting to some extent established practices, and you do this not on the basis of reflections. Still there may be disputes and all this. This is what is solved by establishment of practices. And these questions lead to issues of interpersonal reflective equilibrium, an equilibrium between several persons. What is this about? The general principles endorsed by several individuals who are all separate span a whole space of convictions like, say, the basis of a vector space spans the space. Difference of basis of such a space may actually span the same set of conclusions. And so the scope for interpersonal agreement is perhaps larger than we think. Many religions have seemingly different basic principles, but they seem to come to the same conclusions in many normative issues. So there may be more overlap than at first thought. The sets of different individuals of basic principles and so on may be disjoint. There may be pluralism and all this, and the respect for pluralism was strongly articulated already as a very fundamental principle organizing our judgments. But often they may partly coincide and sometimes they may not. But then we have to deal with that. There is no interpersonal reflective equilibrium. Perhaps there is only an agreement to disagree. As a matter of fact, the consent of all will never prevail or practically never prevail. So whenever you encounter somebody who makes this claim, and philosophers are prone to make this claim, you should be very skeptical. And even if all seek for their reflective equilibrium very eagerly, if they are willing to exchange their views, it will not lead to a consent, even if everybody is concluding or reaching conclusions on the same informational basis. Dissent will prevail. What we have to look at are processes in which the similarities between what we are doing in our practical life and in science and its practice of science. The Rawlsian method of searching for a reflective equilibrium seems to be just a stylized way of articulating the ways we should go about searching for more coherence in normative contexts. The method is akin to scientific discourse, and that's good about it, since we have seen that scientific discourse works well. We also should note as economists that our normative discourse, say in welfare economics, is not really scientific discourse. It's not hard science. It remains ethics, even if it's mathematics. Many people seem to entertain certain illusions about the solidity of results once they are mathematized. But that is only a means. The basis is non-mathematical. Actually, a good example of such things is how people proceeded in the financial crisis or in this time leading up to the financial crisis. The mathematical models are often beautiful, and it's not that they are wrong as far as the logical proofs and so on are concerned. What is wrong with them is often their basic empirical assumption set. And many of the mathematicians do not seem fully aware of the contingent and empirical assumptions they are making. And certainly, practical discourses, even though akin to science to some extent, and to common sense to another extent, to sound common sense, are not the same thing as physics. They are more like talking about engineering and law and so on. Finally, practical deliberation. The theory and practice of business administration should always employ a reflective equilibrium search. Whether such a method or metaphor is useful, of course, only practice can show. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. So what you should do is you should go back and forth yourself. You should go to the cases in the text. There are these cases like whistleblowing. Is it legitimate to blow the whistle? When is it legitimate? When not? Look at cases. Look at the question whether somebody who has been doing something which can be classified as illoyalty towards her or his employer can claim that this was a case of whistleblowing or not, and there are certain conditions that must be fulfilled, etc. You can also look at the case of dumping waste, the case of letting off people. How should you go about it in a principled way? What are the general principles of setting people free of their contracts? What is the correct process of firing them and hiring them? And then you might also want to look at the question whether short selling is really as doubtful as many people think. Because if you think back of the housing crisis, the subprime crisis, then the really worrying issue is that we did not see much more short selling early on. Had we seen more of it, the crisis wouldn't have happened because people would have become alert of the problems. Obviously, they were not alert and thereby they didn't make others alert and so on. Still, is it right if you help another bank in its issuing of shares and you short those shares at the same time to somehow protect your own interest, to hedge your bets? Again, new issues arise there. Is it really true that Morgan Stanley is somehow deceiving another bank? Would it not be the case that the other bank is fully responsible and could anticipate what Morgan Stanley might be doing? And so you go back and forth between certain general principles and considerations of a particular case. And if you do so, that hopefully will excite you. If not, you will look like this.